Hello everybody, before I start this video I'm just going to say I'm sorry for the potential muffled voice, but I think it's a lot better than yesterday. My wisdom teeth do not hurt nearly as much as they did yesterday, and they didn't even hurt that much yesterday to begin with. It was only if I opened my mouth wide, so hopefully I don't, for some reason, just scream for whatever reason and rip the stitches out of my mouth, and as long as that doesn't happen, this video will probably not be too muffled. This guide is going to be on the Even Shaman deck. For all of you who don't know how these guys work, it's basically broken up into 3 parts. First one is basically just overview of the deck. Second one is basically just changes you can make to the deck in order to make it better or make it more budget, depending on what you want. But my version is a little bit more budget, so I will mostly be focusing on how to potentially make it better. And the third one is just a ton of the matchups as well as mulligans you can use in those matchups. So, overview of this deck. You basically want to go wide with a ton of totems and make value trades with those totems using Flame Tongue Totem, Dire Wolf, Knife Juggler, so when you summon things it can ping it. And then use other cards in your deck like the Mercspark Eel, the Fire Elemental, or the Fire Plume Phoenix to deal with other minions on the board that might be harder to deal with. Basically, it's just a go wide deck that really just wants you to pump minions and go face, and it deals with aggro decks very well because your board is so wide they don't know what to do against it, and you can make a ton of value trades without losing a lot of your actual resources, because a lot of the things you're trading in are totems, but it loses to control because if your board gets wiped like one time, you're probably going to get wrecked. I mean, you could maybe rebuild the board once, maybe at most twice, but against like a mage, that doesn't matter. Your board will just get wiped over and over and over again. But that's basically the overview of the deck. Go wide and then hit face. And if you have an Arcane Dynamo, potentially get a Bloodlust, and as long as they don't wipe your board, Bloodlust and go face even harder. Going wide and then pinging to get trades or just trading your totems in for value trades are the main focus points of this deck. Now, changes you can make to this deck are as follows. Basically, several cards that I took out of this deck in order to make it a little cheaper are Calamos, the Windlord, the Corpse Takers, and Thunderheads. All those are epics or legendaries, and in order to replace them, in order to replace Calamos, I put in Hagatha because I thought Calamos is used for the removal, the 3 damage to everything removal, and sometimes to heal, but usually not to fill your board or deal direct damage to the other person, although sometimes it can help in this more aggressive deck. But I was like, Hagatha can do that, but also gives you the potential RNG with spells after playing minions. And to be quite honest, I had horrible luck with that, and I feel like there were multiple games where I actually could have won that I didn't because I just got terrible pulls. I got 3 in a row that were give friendly totems plus 2 health. But once you change to Hagatha, you don't have totems anymore. You can't buff them up. So I ended up buffing up, I think it was a Flame Tongue Totem or Primal Fin Totem 3 times and made it a 0-9. No, wait, yeah, 0-9. I was like, that's the best thing I can do with 3 of the spells that it gave me. In that game, I had like mostly won. Sorry, enough being salty. This deck ended up being 50%, so I'm a little upset about that because this is like the first fully made deck that was worse, or that was 50% or worse. Like most of them have been positive, but I will get into that in a second. And RNG does play a little bit of a role. The Corpse Taker and the Windlord combo, you could splash that in by taking out a Stormforged Axe and maybe a Menacing Nimbus or the Fire Plume Phoenix. And then, actually no, take out Stormforged Axe, the Menacing Nimbus, and the Fire Plume Phoenix to put in Corpse Taker, the Windlord, and Thunderhead. And then Calamos you can put in for Hagatha if you want, but it's not necessarily required in my opinion. I like Hagatha decent, especially if you get some good RNG. There's also the Sea Giant in here. I didn't talk about that with the overview of the deck, but going wide and then playing an 8/8 Sea Giant for basically free while doing so is an amazing power play, and it's hard for the opponent to deal with in pretty much every single situation. But yeah, those are the upgrades I would make to the deck. Taking out a Stormforged Axe for a Windlord, and then either the Fire Plume Phoenix or the Menacing Nimbus for a Corpse Taker. And then, if you want to go even further, you can take out whichever of the elementals you didn't take out. So, like, either the Fire Plume Phoenix or the Menacing Nimbus, whichever you didn't take out, and then put in a Thunderlord. not Thunderlord, Thunderhead. And then that synergizes with Zap, and even if you use both Zaps, a 3-5 for 4 that could potentially get you something is decent. And the reason why I might keep Hagatha in here is because you could get overload spells to synergize with Thunderhead, but Calamos is good because Thunderhead is an elemental. So the Hagatha thing, I think that's up to personal preference. So, as I said, this deck was exactly 50% win rate, and I will get into all of the win rates in a second, but just an overview of the win rates. Against aggro, this deck stomps because it's just too many things for the person to deal with, because you have totems you can buff up and make value trades and things to ping them with. And against control, your board gets wiped, you kind of just lose. In mid-range, it's fairly even in my opinion. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Druid is the first matchup that we're going to talk about, and I think that this matchup is not great for you. It's not ideal. You are 2-4 into this matchup, and honestly, I understand why. A spreading plague play is absolutely devastating, but also the Giggling Inventor, which single-handedly beats Even Shaman, in my opinion, in most aggro decks. Like, the introduction of that card is absolutely absurd, and every time I talk about this card, it will probably be to complain about it because I absolutely hate it. Fact that it just becomes an immovable wall for like a turn is ridiculous, and a lot of the times I have to hit a sea giant into it to kill it because I only have so many totems to trade in to his 1/2s, because the totems have 2 health, and so it's not as easy to just hit one of the Annoyatrons, trade off like 1/1 soldier, and then hit again a 1/1 silverhand recruit. Totems have the 2 health, so you can't act. It's a lot harder to get over them. First of all. Second of all, the fact that they get a wide board is annoying, and Druids run this card actually a decent amount. That and Spreading Plague. So this matchup, as a whole, just not great for you. I'm surprised I went 2 against it, especially considering Swipe also exists, which can kill all of your 1/1 Murlocs in a single swipe and kind of just wreck you. And the next matchup is Hunter. Hunter doesn't use Giggling Inventor, so I'm actually surprised that this one's a losing matchup. But all of your things have 2 health, so Explosive Trap and Rexar do wipe your board in both of those situations. And playing against a Spell Hunter or Hybrid Hunter, you're probably going to lose. Against Death Rattle, you can actually get enough of an early presence to win. And that's the matchup of the Hunter that this deck wins against, Death Rattle Hunter. Against Spell Hunter and Hybrid Hunter, they lose, especially if the Hybrid Hunter is the fully made one, not my budget version without Rexar. If they also have Rexar and the value beasts, you're probably just going to get beat out by the Rexar play or Explosive Traps. There's really very little you can do about it. Honestly, this matchup is not terrible, especially considering one of the 3, because they're pretty popular. I'd say it goes Spell Hunter, Death Rattle Hunter, then Spell Hunter, then Hybrid Hunter in terms of popularity. Considering I think that Death Rattle Hunter is either tied for the most popular or the most popular Hunter deck right now. I'd say that with a little bit more play, if I had played like another 20 games, played against 1 or 2 more Death Rattle and like 1 more spell, I feel like this matchup would have been a little more even. I don't think it's like, it looks like it's as bad as the Druid matchup, and I don't believe that is true. I actually have a lot of 2-4 matchups, and I'll get into those, the Shaman one later, but the 2-4, 2-4, 2-5, 2-4, they all have reasons why they're bad. The Mage one, it's just the constant removal. Obviously, you can build up a board, it gets wiped. You can build up another one with more totems and stuff, it gets wiped. The Giant, you play it on one of the far sides, so if he meteors it, it only kills 1 other minion. That's actually a really important tip. When you play the Giant, you want to play it last, and you want to play it on the far left or far right side, so that way the Meteor only kills it and 1 other minion. And you want to do it usually on the right side, because if you do it on the right side, it usually only kills the totem, whereas things on the left could be slightly more valuable targets, because the totems always spawn on the right. But it could get polymorphed. Just Blizzard kills pretty much all of your totems. Flame Strike kills everything. Dragon's Fury kills everything. Mage is just a real rough one for you, and it's a rough one in a lot of like for a lot of aggro decks. Maybe not so much rogue because it's not as wide of a deck. It's more of a hit hard with some bigger minions. And to that, they don't have as many responses. But for Even Shaman, wide boards, that's where mages really shine. Killing wide boards and then getting to the elemental and then just murdering you. Next matchup is Paladin. This matchup's a win because of the fact that you can get a healing totem and you can earth and might it and it will never die. You'll trade into things and then you'll heal up. Knife Juggler into totems and other little minions, ping off all of his 1/1s or get rid of divine shields or whatnot. All of the various pings like the Fire Plume Phoenix, Flame Elemental, and the Eel all kill some of his little things while getting you a creature on the board for a pretty good value. This deck actually works well against other wide board decks and aggro decks, and that's why this deck beats Paladin. And I feel like if Odd Paladin was more popular, this matchup would be shown more, because I feel like the one I lost wasn't even an odd. I feel like it was even, or like a mech or something where I couldn't deal with a giant thing. But actually, no, I don't know if that's true, because I do have a hex or two in here, so I don't think... Point is, the Paladin matchup right here, I feel like it could have been better if I played some more games and Paladin is a little more popular. Priest is a hard one, and I never really know how to judge because there's so few priests actually playing. Like, there are only 2 games. The only deck that has less is Warrior, and Warrior, I'll just say right now because I'm going to skip it at the end because it's only 1 game. You kind of lose to Warrior. He's too much armor, too much potential removal, and then when he gets to his mechs later on in the game, you just really can't do much. Because of Reckless Fury that destroys his armor but then destroys your board, and Brawl, considering you have a really wide board a lot of the times, it just lives, is a totem. So Warrior's a bad matchup. But anyway, on to Priest, because that was what I was focusing on. Duskbreaker really hurts. But because your deck is so effective at building a board back up, one board wipe isn't that big of a deal. Like, the reason why Mage is so bad is because it can board wipe over and over and over again. But for Priest, it has Duskbreaker, but then it has like a 2 or 3 turn wait before it gets to Psychic Scream or Primordial Drake. So you actually have 1 or 2 turns to build up a board presence and start going aggro again. I don't think that this matchup is favored for you, but I do think it's around 50%, maybe slightly less, only because Priest has a lot of heal potential. Rogue. Oh boy, Rogue. This is 5-1. This is, in my opinion, a really good matchup for you, only because he has so many ways of dealing with the few minions he gets out. You have a wide board. You have no problem trading in a 3-1 Murloc that you're pumping with a Flame Tongue Totem into his Vicious Fledgling that he had to play for tempo, because if he didn't play it, he'd be losing the game anyway and taking 3 face damage. Or you can kill it with 2 totems, or pretty much anything. Like, the fact that you get to make so many value trades and just control the board for so long while also having your own presence and being able to kill him and being aggro yourself is just so effective. Like, it's good for the same reason it's good against Paladin, and the same reason it is outstanding against Zoolock. You can just make value trades and ping things and eventually just, like, win the game off of that. This deck isn't even fully aggro deck because it actually doesn't do a ton of damage super duper fast. It builds up a board fast but doesn't win the game fast. It's more of an anti-aggro deck but not really control. It's somewhere in the middle. I wouldn't even say it's mid-range because it's like an early game deck that's meant to control the board and deal with it but then go aggro like immediately after on turn like 5 or 6. Maybe it's a mid-range. I don't know. I don't think it fits quite into the mid-range category, but it is more of a mid-range deck than an aggro deck. I don't know where I'm going with this, but point is, this deck beats Rogue pretty handily, and it beats Warlock for the same exact reason, so I'm probably going to skip the Warlock matchup or just quickly go over it, and then at the end I'll go over the mulligans. But anyway, the last matchup is Shaman. There's the Mirror match, which is 50-50, and then the Shudderwalk matchup, which is bad for you. The same reason why Mage is bad for you. They have Volcano and Lightning Storm and Hagatha, all of which that remove your board. It's just disappointing. Speaking of Hagatha, I didn't say this when I was talking about the Hunter matchup, but if they get out the Spellstone, if they get it out like a little bit late, Hagatha, amazing way of dealing with it. I mean, obviously that might not happen. They're going to have to play it like 2 turns late, and if they do it only 2 turns late, you're going to have to coin into it. But Hagatha can be good in a lot of matchups. But Hagatha's good into this matchup because this deck is not extremely fast. It builds up a wide board and has some setup and then closes out the games quickly. But it takes a while to set up and get that wide board. So if you're playing against a Shaman, a Shutterwalk, and you get to like turn 7 and you're like, okay, I have a big enough board here, I'm going to Bloodlust, or I'm going to play a Flame Tongue Totem and start doing some heavy damage. And then that turn, they Hagatha. Like, you just get kind of wrecked. Against Even, really, it's the luck of the draw. Who can deal with what first? Like, if I play a Knife Juggler and then he plays the eel, the 2/3 that deals 2 damage to kill my Knife Juggler, I basically just lose the game off of that one play unless I get like crazy top decks that deal with all of his stuff. So it's either a 50-50 matchup or a losing matchup in the Shaman's case. So it's not super good. Haven't seen many Elemental Shamans. That's a pretty low tier deck, but I think that this deck would beat it too. And I'm talking about that because I might play Elemental Shaman in the near future because I think that because my name is Elemental Core, I should probably do that at some point. The last deck is the Warlock deck, and against Even, not super good because if you're not, again, it takes you a while to set up. They'll get down to low health. They have Defile, they have Hellfire, they have ways of controlling the board, and then once they get down below 15, they have 7/7 taunts and 8/8 mountain giants that deal with your 8/8 sea giants, and you kind of just lose the game. But luckily for you, most of the games that I played, and most of the games that you'll probably play against a Warlock are Zoo. And against Zoo, it's the same reason why this deck is good against Paladin and Rogue. Very good at dealing with these wide boards because you have things to make value trades with and pings to kill off his minions. Overall, this deck is a 50% win rate, beats aggro decks really hard, and loses to control decks moderately, but there are apparently more control decks out now than aggro decks, even though I didn't know that was the case. I thought there were a lot more Zoolocks than just slightly above average. Also, I didn't talk about the Tempo Mage matchup. I feel like this deck loses to Tempo Mage because they don't rely on the minions so much that you value trade into. They rely on burn spells, and you don't have any heal in this deck because Healing Rain is 3 mana, and the only armor you have is Hagatha, so it's not a great matchup for you with Tempo Mage either. Mage kind of just beats this deck. And speaking of beating this deck, Giggling Inventor. I'm sorry if I'm complaining about this card too much, but Giggling Inventor single-handedly beats this deck, and I don't know if I want to recommend this deck fully until that card is nerfed or sees less play in other decks, because honestly, playing that and having 4 minions to have to trade into it to kill it really, really hurts, especially considering that sometimes, because you can only Flame Tongue Totem 2 minions, and a lot of your totems don't have attack, you'll have to hit your giant, your sea giant, into a 1/2 taunt because you don't have enough minions to kill it off to go face with the 8/8. It's a little disappointing, I will say. But if you do make the upgrades I talked about earlier, this deck does have potential to be a little bit better because the Windlord and the Corpse Taker combo alone is actually really good value for a 4-drop. And the Thunderheads with Zap do make it easier to deal with that Giggling Inventor. So if you see a lot of Giggling Inventors, and you probably will, Thunderhead is a potential card you can put in. So let's get into the mulligans real quick before I get off. Cards I love to keep, cards I keep in almost every situation, are most of the 2-drops. The Eel, absolutely 100% keep every single time. Both of the totems, Flame Tongue Totem and Primal Fin Totem, are pretty good, especially because you play Primal Fin Totem. It gets you 2 minions, and then you Flame Tongue Totem the next turn. And now you have like 5 minions on the board, so you can trade in and still have a thing on either side for the Flame Tongue Totem. Knife Juggler and Direwolf are a little less high priority 2-drops, but if you have them, wouldn't necessarily get rid of them. And then the last 2 are Zap and Sea Giant, because honestly, solid cards, but oh, it's hard because Sea Giant can sometimes not do good if it's against control. So okay, if you're against another aggro deck, Sea Giant is really good. It gives you a lot of tempo, and same with Zap. But if you're against a control deck, I would not keep Sea Giant or Zap. That is the ultimate mulligan guide to this deck. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I would do. Every now and then, maybe keep a Hex if you think you're going to be playing against a deck that relies on like 1 minion to help them win the game, like Even Warlock, I'll occasionally keep a Hex, simply because if they play a 8/8 Mountain Giant or a Twilight Drake with a value, I can just Hex it and potentially do something to capitalize on that board. I hope you guys enjoyed this guide. I actually enjoyed this deck quite a bit because of the fact that there are so many, like, this deck gets so wide and it always seems like you're in a good spot until you get wiped, obviously, but it always seems like you're in a good spot. And there are ways that you can make this deck better. It was extremely frustrating playing against Giggling Inventor, but after a little bit, either I or somebody else, if you're watching streams, will probably figure out ways around the Giggling Inventor. Can't run Blood Knight in this deck because it's even. If you could, all of your problems would be solved, but unfortunately can't do that. I'd say the best thing to do is Thunderhead with a Zap combo to zap the 2/1 and then use the Thunderheads to kill each of the, or the Sparks to kill each of the Divine Shields and then kill the minions and then go face. That's the best counter I can see to it right now, which is why I actually recommend Thunderhead. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this guide. I enjoyed this deck a lot, actually. I enjoy aggro decks, and this deck was 50%, and I'm a little disappointed that it did so bad, but with the upgrades, it could definitely be a little bit better, if not a lot better. And honestly, I feel like this deck could push above 50% win rate fairly easily. Like, I was above 50% until I went on like a 5-game lose streak right at the end. I could have ended this deck with like a, I don't know, like a 55, 60% win rate. It kind of ended up all being RNG at the end, losing 5 games in a row, playing against a lot of control matchups right at the end. So if you're playing against a lot of aggro decks and you have this and say aggro becomes meta, or becomes even more meta, definitely run this deck. But if you're playing against a lot of control decks, especially ones that run Giggling Inventor, I would recommend against this deck. I think that's the best advice I could give to you. That's not like strictly how to play, but like when to play this deck is important too. And it'll be good in certain metas, but it might not be good in this current one, especially with all of the control decks out right now. But yeah, I enjoyed this deck. I hope you guys enjoyed the guide. I've said that 3 times now, so I'm sorry for drilling that one into you. And I'll see you in my next one. I'm probably going to play 2 Zulok decks, a budget one and a full one, because people were asking when I was going to do Zulok again because they enjoyed it. So hopefully that deck goes better than this one, and both of them go over 50%, because that's the ultimate goal. See ya.